good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you happen to be in the world. We appreciate everybody joining us today for this overview of Progressus PSA as it pertains to Dynamics 365 Business Central. My name is Rich Fowler. I work with the partner channel here at Progressus. We also have a special guest with us today. Kim Bateson from our consulting team is here, and she's going to jump in as well for some of the more detailed questions. That's a bonus we weren't expecting, so that's a beautiful thing. Thank you, Kim, for being here. We will do a high-level overview of Progressus PSA and what it does, what it's designed to do, how it can help you in your D365 Business Central experience. That's the plan. We will go through some of the additional features, things like the Power BI pack that comes with Progressus, some of the reports and things, the dashboards that are part of that Power BI pack and how those can help you. We'll go through the project wizard and show you how Dynamics 365 Business Central, how Progressus, how the CRM in D365 Business Central all talk to each other and work interconnectedly. And then we'll get into some other more detailed things as we go. With that being said, Progressus PSA is the professional services add-on for Dynamics 365 Business Central. Written specifically for Dynamics 365 Business Central, it adds all the things that the professional services company would want to see in Business Central, things specific to people like ourselves, people who are in the business of having personnel and hours and expenses and resources against projects, and then trying to figure out from there how those projects are doing, how profitable are they, how do I assign my resources, things like that. The real advantage to Progressus PSA is that we tie all of it together. We are not only the resource management front end, but we do also take it all the way through resource management through resource costing and project accounting at the back end and tie that into D365. So we are the full picture solution versus some of the other solutions that are out there that have great flash at the front end, but don't actually tie into anything when it comes to accounting. We like to say we're the full picture as it pertains to all of that. I mentioned Power BI. That's a lot of times where we like to start when we think about showing somebody Progressus PSA and how it might help them. What you're seeing in front of you, or what you should be seeing in front of you, is the project overview from Power BI. These are the 13 dashboards that come with the product, everything from project overview through top-bottom rankings in all of your projects that you have out there, each one with a little bit of a description on what it can do for you and what it will show you. Makes more sense to actually look at those overviews and see what they are. I can see as I look at that dashboard, this tells me a lot of information just at a glance. I can tell from the stoplight indicators what's green, what's red, where things are as far as relative health, and I can see my entire project list at the top, as well as budget versus actuals by project on the left-hand side. So if I want to see a specific project, all I need to do is click on that specific project. It will then drill into that specific project and bring that detailed information out for me, giving me all of my margin information on the left-hand side, giving me my budget, my revenue, my cost analysis at the bottom. And even with those, I do have the ability to hover and see the trending from tooltips. And if there's detail underneath that, I can click on that information, whether it's a right click and a drill through. I can drill down. I can go all the way through and get as much information as I want on that particular piece of project data by drilling down through Power BI. As I look at this, like I said, there's a ton of information there. You can play with this, you can pull things out, and if you've not played with Power BI, I'm going to say that's something you should probably try to do relatively quickly. You can pull everything out if you want to see that particular graph in its own screen and be able to move around. You can do those kinds of things. Other things, like I said, there are 13 different dashboards. When you get to the project details, if I want to get down to specific details on a specific project, I can do that. I can see cost versus actual. One of the things that many of our customers like, if we look over on the bottom right-hand side, budget versus actual by task, all in one graph, I can look at that. Actually, if I want to pop it out, I can see it a little better. And now I can see the charts and the lines pertaining to what my budgeted hours were, what my actual hours are, how far I am down the progress. And that's a great visual representation just of budget versus actual on a particular project. Another budget versus actual, we talk a lot about resource overview and resource planning. I do have the ability to look at resource overview, look at my resources, see what resources are being used on what projects, how much they have in terms of hours, how much they have in terms of budget available. We'll get into budgeting here in a little bit, and you'll be able to see budget versus capacity if you want to put the capacity in. Many times we have been asked about visual representations of personnel, so I can look and you'll see I do have a Gantt as it loads. We do have a Gantt analysis chart for resourcing, and I can see it does pop into today, so if I want to bring it back to where I actually have data, I can see some of the visual representations of the tasks that I have, where they are, when they're due, when they're overdue, how complete they are, things like that. The Manager Performance tab is important because that can tell you from a manager's KPI perspective. It's not, the term might be misleading. A manager performance is not how are my managers doing, but if I'm a project manager, how are my projects doing? And I can see the performance of my projects. I can see on the left-hand side the basics of budget versus actual. I can see the basics of where things are. I can see margin if I want to get down into specific things, if I want to know how Thomas is doing, and I can see that it's red, and I can see that we've used a lot more than we budgeted, those kinds of things. I can tell why, and if I want to drill in, I can drill through and I can see what the deal is on much of that. So Power BI is one of the things that Microsoft talks about when they talk about the next generation of Microsoft tools. Power BI is going to be a big part of that. If you've not yet played with Power BI, it's highly recommended, and it's a great tool for trying to figure out what's going on within the project. Now, we start there because all this information pulls from Progressus PSA into Power BI. If I come back and I get into Progressus PSA, Dynamics 365 Business Central comes with something like 28 to 32 different role centers pre-configured. We at Progressus PSA have added 5 other role centers specific to the professional services and project functionality. And if I hit the settings button, I can see by looking at the role centers, I am currently logged in as a project executive, but I mentioned those 32 or so other role centers that are already there. That's straight from Microsoft D365. These are all the roles that are pre-configured, preloaded. If you are a customer service person, if you're an IT manager, if you're the president or the accountant or the resource manager or whomever, you can go in and load that up, and it will bring in your home screen to load in all the things that Microsoft, that somebody has determined these are likely the things you're going to deal with. Now, we at Progressus have added these 5 from the accounting manager, line manager, think approver or supervisor, the project executive versus project manager. Project manager, obviously you know what that is. A project executive, think somebody that might be overall responsible for the project, but not necessarily need to be in the approvals chain for management things like that. And then a base time and expense user. The real difference here, if I click Project Executive and go back to where we started, you see that home screen. You can see that the Project Executive has access to quite a bit, and anything that has the line underneath means I can drill through and get into that and get into underlying information. And I can also see the activities and things, the tiles off on the left-hand side, whether it's invoicing or time and expense or being able to figure out what I'm doing. All those tiles are there, and other tiles are available. The difference being, that's great if I'm a project manager or a project executive, but if I'm a basic time entry person, that's probably more than I want my time entry people dealing with. So the role center is designed specifically to make it very simple for that time and expense user in Progressus to just see what they need to see. So now as I log in there, you'll notice that much of that information went away. It's a little more optimized for phones, and really all this user has the ability to do now is enter or review time and expense activity. So designed at the role center level to make life as easy as possible for the user, no matter what that user might be in the organization, from the top to the bottom and everything in between. And then let me log back in as project executive. And one other thing that we hear quite frequently, this is D365 Business Central mostly, but it applies across the board. One of the things we hear frequently is, can I personalize my home screen? Can I add a field? Can I remove something? Can I move things around a little bit? Absolutely. And there's lots of detail on the Microsoft site and in the instruction manuals on how to do that. But from a very simple side, I can go to the settings wheel, and I can see I've got 2 options. I can either design, which would apply to the entire organization, or I can personalize, which would apply just to me as this particular user. So if I'm in the IT department and I want to make sure that everybody sees the same thing, I can design it in such a way that everybody sees the same thing. If I'm just trying to see what I want to see and make it easy for me personally, I hit personalize. Now it tells me I am personalizing my role center, and what am I trying to do? So whether I want to move my projects window, in this case I have the ability to put a project listing of all the things that I have out there that I'm responsible for. I can put that project listing where I want it. Do I want it there? Do I want to move it over? Do I want to remove it completely? Do I want to add other fields? Do I want to do whatever I want to do? In most cases, let me just hit the more button. Give me a list of the things that I'm allowed to do, and that's everything from add fields to move fields, and we'll kind of go through that. But the short answer to the question, can I configure, can I personalize my home screen and the screens that I see? Absolutely you can, and you can do that inside of Dynamics 365 Business Central. So let's go from here. I'm in as the project manager. I know Kim's going to do an overview and talk about budgets and some other things, so I'm going to skip all of that. I'm going to go to the things that show where all of it ties in together, which generally is from the project wizard. One of the things that we heard and things we thought about as we were designing Progressus was, how do we make life easier across the board? And the complaints that we got from older project software was it takes too long and it's too complicated to create a new project. It causes headaches within my organization, and they're not all set up the same way, and people get confused and those kinds of things. So can we make that easier? Absolutely we can. And the way to do that is we created a wizard to help you set up the project. As I set up that project, this wizard's going to walk me through how to set up the project and give me the ability, or give you the ability in your organization, to standardize and make a lot of the decisions for your project managers or whoever is creating your project, and make life easier for them as they go. So do I want to choose a number series? I can. I can also have a predefined set of numbers or a predefined protocol where I can say, yes, for this type of a project, I want to use this type of number series, and you can configure that to the way your organization works. So you can do that. Or you can say, hey, just number them 1 through whatever and take the next available number. Either one of those is fine, but you have flexibility there. On the project description, I do need to give it a description, so let's just say this is a test for me today. Is there a project template available? So what this suggests and tells you is that you do have the ability to put an unlimited number of templates out there. So if you have 10 different types of projects that you do on a regular basis, you can templatize that project, make it as straightforward and simple for your user as possible to say, this is the type of project, and we can move forward. If I choose, I don't have to if I don't want to, and then we can go ahead and go to the next step. So it's, what's the status of the project? Now this tells us from the drop-down menu that you've got the ability to do it either as a quote or as an order. That also gives you an indication of what it is in your CRM, because a quote could go to both a contact as well as a customer, and an order would be for a customer. Another question that we get in there a lot is, can you invoice against a quote? Maybe I've got a quote out there that I need to do invoicing against, whether it's internal or whether it's external. Short answer, yes, you can invoice against quotes if needed. So that's something you can do. Is the project created on a customer or a prospect? Again, tying back to CRM. And this says if it's a customer, then yes, I want to say it's a customer. And because of that direct integration with the CRM and D365 Business Central, it allows me to pick which customer this project will belong to. So I can click the ellipsis and it's going to bring up my customer list, and I can say, sure, this is going to go to, let's say it goes to the ski house. So it's pulled that in for me, and I can go to the next step in the process. What's my project posting group? You should probably talk to your partner for a second about the project posting groups. That goes down to the dimensions, part of the accounting process, and you can set a lot of that up ahead of time so that it can drop in for you and not make your people have to think about that. In this case, I've got it set to a setting up project, and it's going to drop in the correct posting groups there. We'll discuss dimensions in a minute. You can put a start and end date to the project if you need to. You can drop in discounts at this level if you want to. You certainly don't have to. Gives you the ability if necessary. What's the pipeline? This again goes back to that integration between the CRM that's part of Business Central and your project. I can have multiple pipelines. So if I've got a different type of a pipeline for a different type of project, I can choose the pipeline, and then I can choose the pipeline location. So where am I in the pipeline? And I can track that project as it goes through. So yes, you do have the ability to do your pipeline tracking against your opportunities. What's my active budget? That's a huge difference between Progressus PSA and standard D365 Business Central. Progressus PSA gives you an unlimited number of budgets against your projects. So you do have the ability to do anchor budgets or beginning budgets, and then do change order budgets and do what if budgets and do other budgets as you go through the process. Who's my project manager? I can choose a project manager if I want to. I go in here, that's going to grab it directly against my CRM and the folks that are there. I don't have to choose it if I don't want to. Who's my person responsible? I can go ahead and grab a person responsible. And again, if I don't have that, I don't need to. Now, if that's part of my approvals process, then I may have to, but you'll talk about that in the implementations phase. And then it asks me what's going to happen from here. Do I want to create a task template or use one that's already been created? In this case, I'm going to say, yeah, I do. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. Do I want to create a payment schedule? Do I want to? Yes, I can. Don't have to. Do I want to create my invoicing setup from here? In this case, yes, I want to do that as well. And then what type of a project is it? Is it an internal project, a private project, a customer project? In this case, I've got it defaulting to customer projects unless I tell it differently. All of these are going to cause it to do something else as I step through the next step in the process. So when I click next, now it asks me what's the KPI. As the project manager, how do I want to track this? Is it fixed? Is it T&M? Is it something else? So I can follow those as needed, and I can go ahead and go all the way through those, whether it's resource, invoice, expense, whatever. I can grab those along the way, totally up to you by project. We said we'd talk about dimensions. Dimensions are the accounting locations. From us old-timers, we think account, sub-account, and how those manage to go back to our reporting. With dimensions, it actually opens it up a little further and lets you dig a little deeper into the accounting and into the data. So your dimensions are definitely something you're going to want to think about and figure out what you want to do. And in this case, I'm just going to leave the two that popped in for me. Those are the two that I want to track. And again, whether it's department, location, region, customer group, customer type, however you want to slice and dice your data, you've almost got unlimited flexibility. Not quite unlimited, but almost unlimited flexibility. And then I'm going to click Finish. Now that's the project wizard. It took me through, but what it did in that process, though, is tell me, hey, you asked me to do a few other things, so let's do those. Number one, you said you wanted to set up a task list. So which of the project task lists, or in project terms, the WBS, which WBS do I want to deal with? So is it a long software project, a short software project? Is it something else? Let's just say it's a short software project. So if I choose that, I also have the ability to say, do I want to do all of the tasks in that WBS or just some of them? So I've got the ability to do some editing as we go through. In this case, I'm going to grab them all because I can always edit later as we go through. That's going to drop those in. Now it asked me on the invoice setup. We told it we wanted to go ahead and set up the invoice template. How do I want to set up that invoice template? Is it a detail? Is it a short invoice? Is it a summary invoice? I'm just going to go ahead and say summary, and now it created my project. So project 6 was created. If I click on that and take it back, I can now go back to my projects listing and be able to find that as we roll in. Some things we didn't talk about, we mentioned the integration between CRM and D365 Business Central and Progressus. You'll notice I have all of the things over on the right-hand side in tile format that I'm used to when it comes to dealing with orders and customer data. So pulling in all of my customer data from a particular customer. Do I know where their balance is? All of this. I've got that information available, and I've got the ability to add other things as needed. So whatever my dashboard needs to look like, or whatever my project screen or project card needs to look like, I've got the ability to see that. One of the other things that we talk about frequently is that one Microsoft story and how all the Microsoft tools work together. You'll notice both in this screen as in many others that we'll see as we go forward, you do have the ability to play in Excel. So a lot of folks like to start in one place and take it to Excel and manipulate it and bring it back. You do have that two-way integration with Excel in many of the opportunities in Progressus PSA. So yes, you do have Excel integration and some other integrations as we go through too, and we're continually adding more of those as we go through the process. I'm going to do two things. Number one, I'm going to make Kim presenter and introduce Kim Bateser from our consulting team. Thank you for being here, Kim.
Okay, so Rich walked through the project wizard. I'm going to drill down into a few other things related to the product. So I'm also logged in as project executive, and I'll go to my project list, and we'll see some of the things that I can see on a project. So I have several projects already set up. So you'll see here at the bottom I have various tasks set up, and these are nested within each other, so you can have multiple layers of task structure, parent and child tasks. And then depending on if you have them rolling up, they'll roll up to the level above. All these have drill down also within. So if I click here, I would see all the tasks, the data related to those tasks within that roll up within here as well. You can see we have the ability to track actual costs. So when you see that it says usage costs, that's my actual postings. We also have the ability to have budgets on the projects as well, which is budgets here. And then we also have the ability to track transactions based off of both my resource items or expenses. So I can track costs for my timesheets, as well as if I have inventory items on the project, those will be in separate columns as well, so I can see the details of that. And then I also have the ability to track expenses, which come from either a purchase invoice or an expense report. We can also generate budgets onto the projects. So I'll go here, and we have a screen we call Budget with Capacity. This screen allows me to create budgets. It's going to allow me to do two different facets of a budget. One is planning my team members and the hours they'll work, and also budgeting costs and revenue based on those hours as well. So I can choose a resource in this grid here, and I can begin creating a budget for it. Now, one of the things that it does is it will give me the ability to type my budget in here by, this instance is by day. I could change the grouping to be by month or week or quarter or year. So whatever level that you want to budget the project at, you can choose that, and it would change these columns to group accordingly. So it's very simple to put a budget in. I just put the number of hours that I would expect them to work, and then with that, it creates a transaction line for the budget that has both their cost and their billing amount. So when I entered those 8 hours, it not only planned the resource against that project, but then it also gave me total cost and total billing amount. So these would flow back into that Power BI tool set that Rich was showing earlier. You would see that this resource is planned for that day. And with that, we can also see the individual's team members' availability. So we call it capacity, but we have availability by day here. And then we can see if they have anything that they've been budgeted against, the remaining balance will show something different. So right now I'm showing capacity, but I can change it to show remaining, and then it will show how many hours they have available that they have not been budgeted. So you can see these numbers decremented because they've been budgeted against projects. Okay. This one's a weekend, and they've been booked on a weekend. They don't usually have capacity, so that's why you would see that negative value. So we can budget other things besides resources. We can budget a resource group, which would be like their work type or labor class. We can also budget based off of expenses. So if they have we expect hotel or travel costs, we can put those in as budgets. And we can also enter budgets for items in inventory as well if we want to. So that helps me with understanding my team members' availability and my capacity for those team members. It also gives me the ability to have budget on the project from a dollar perspective as well. I'll show the timesheet entry screen and what that looks like. So as a user, I'm in as a project executive, so that gives me the ability to look at invoices if I need to. It can also allow me to approve, but also lets me enter time as well. So as a user of the system, even as a project manager, I would want to enter my own timesheet. You can enter timesheets on behalf of someone else if you give them permissions to do so. We call it an impersonator. We can do the same with expense reports. Here you'll see I have chosen my project and my task that I want to enter time to, and then I've entered the hours per day. And we have the ability to also enter overtime and regular hours. So if you have folks that need to enter overtime, they can designate that on their timesheets. And we can also put invoice comments in that can flow to the invoice for purposes of billing if desired. You can also put comments in that don't flow to the invoice if that's also a requirement. Once I've finished my timesheet, I can submit it, and then that moves us into the workflow. And so we can have approval workflow in up to 3 levels. The same with the expense reports, so the same process is available for expense reports. So here I can see that my first level of approver is my project manager, or a person responsible, or someone I've given rights to. So we can give rights to a different approver if you didn't want it to be the project manager. Then the second layer would be my supervisor, or what we call a line manager. And then the third layer is what we call a project executive. And so this is most often an accounting resource or someone who has rights to all projects. So we can use any or all layers. You could just use layer 1 if you wanted, and when the project manager approved it, it would post to the project. Or you could use 1, 2, and 3, or just 3. Any combination you can use if you want. You can completely bypass approval if you want. So when the employee submits their timesheet, it would automatically submit the timesheet to the project as a cost at that point. We have the same ability as on expenses. So if I go to, I'm going to do expense sheets, open expense sheets here. You can create your own expense type. So whatever terminology your team is familiar with. This is my expense type list: hotels, meals, mileage, but you can put whatever type of expenses you want in. We also have the ability to have it reimburse the employee. So if we use employee paid, that would flow over to the payables, and you can cut a check to them. If it's company paid, you could also have it flow to payables if you wanted, with the payable to the credit card company rather than to the employee themselves. Or you can just have this recorded as a project expense, or it can also flow to GL. So there's multiple combinations what we can interface with the expense reports when they're submitted. Same thing, if I submit this expense report, it's going to go to the approval workflow, just like the timesheet I just showed you a few minutes ago. We can, one common question I get also related to just projects and the type of projects we have, we can create prices for those projects, where we can set up a billing rate for each project here. And by doing so, we can set up by resource. So if we go here, I can set up billing rates based off a specific person or a resource group. So on this specific project, I've set up billing rates for associate, manager, and vice president. If I wanted to have a specific billing rate for a person, I could by coming here, instead of choosing the resource group or work type. Instead, I'm going to choose, I want to set up a specific rate for Alex. And so even if Alex is in one of these other groups, because Alex has a more specific rate, it will take his rate instead. And so you can set up rates by person, resource group as needed. And you can do it by project or generically. So if I remove this project here, ID, it would be, Alex would be billable across all projects at $100 if it wasn't designated for a specific project. So it's essentially setting up exceptions by project. I can also copy this to another project, so I can essentially have billing rate templates as well. We can do the same on expenses. So if you want to mark up expenses 15% or 25% or whatever you want to do, you can certainly do that in the same method as I just showed you, only on the expense itself. I will show you billing options. So we have a couple options for billing specifically. We can do scheduled billings here. And those scheduled billings are based off of what we would consider milestones, such as I have a due date and I set up milestone 1. We can track it to a specific task, and then that will allow us to bill that task here. So I'm going to get rid of that. And so let's say I want to bill $60,000, and maybe I want to bill that monthly, so I can do a frequency of once a month here if I wanted to, and I can tell it then I want to do it for 12 months if I wanted. So then I can set up a recurring invoicing if I want to, or I could just do a one-time invoicing. It doesn't matter. So if we're doing it for a milestone that was not recurring, I would just remove that frequency and remove the number of repetitions. So you can set up as many milestones as you want and then generate those milestones, or what we would call scheduled billings. We also have the idea of milestones as well, where we can set up a milestone to track, like almost like a tick list, where we can set up specific milestones and track those, and then the project managers can come up here and say if they're finished or not, and then it would date time stamp it so we know when that milestone was completed. And then that can have financial implications, meaning if this milestone was linked to a task that's also set up as a billing, that billing would not be able to be completed until this milestone was designated as finished. I'll show you our billing process now and how that looks. So if I go back here, I can, as transactions are occurring, whether it's a timesheet or an expense report, back here, a timesheet or an expense report, they're going to flow into what we call our scheduled billing screen. And so each one of my billable projects is showing in this list. And then if I drill down on it, you'll see that I have individual transactions that are being created. So these 3 lines were generated from timesheets and expense reports that were created. So now these become available for billing. If I don't want to bill them all, I can override the quantity to invoice to be something different. I can also just create my invoice through a process here, hit create invoice. Anything that I have chosen as approved down here will then be pulled over into the invoice. Now if I do create invoice, I can designate a time range that I want to invoice for. So if I want to only bill for the month of January, I can put 01/31/18, such like that. So that's going to do for that billing range of these dates if I wanted to do that, if I wanted to limit. So this opens up the ability to bill weekly, bi-monthly, semi-monthly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, monthly, whatever time frame you want by using these posting dates. I already have an invoice created, so I'm going to go ahead and show you that. I'm going to go out of here, and if I go to my invoicing, so if I had chosen create invoice, all it does is come over here and creates an invoice for me then to be able to bill. So we have logic in the system that allows me to group certain things or control the display of the transactions on the invoice. And so that's, right now I have this set up to detail. So it's going to show who the resource is and the hours that they incurred. This expense that came through, so it's also billing that one. So at this point I have the choice to go ahead and invoice this and post it, or if we wanted to go through it, if you had an approval process set up on just the invoicing piece, you can request approval and that will move it through the workflow in order for other staff or executives to review it or managers to review it before it's sent out. Once it's posted, then I will come back and update the project totals to be invoiced to date, and that's all the steps there are to invoicing. I want to go back to the invoicing screen so you can see a couple other things here. This line here on this fixed price job actually has, these billing lines were created through the scheduled billings that I just showed you a few minutes ago. So they become part of the standard workflow, and I have other lines that were created as well. So this is a combination of fixed price and a scheduled billing. So these are ones that I've previously billed. So you can see I billed them for actual timesheets previously. So this is a combination of fixed price plus other expenses. But these are those management fees from scheduled billings that I can see here. So these are available just like any other timesheets or expense report lines, and they work through the same workflow as those for purposes of generating an invoice, so you don't have a lot of disparate processes related to your invoicing at that point. We can also see things that have been posted before, so simple things of looking at previously posted invoices or purchase invoices as well. I'll go ahead and show you a purchase invoice. So we can associate a project and a task to a payable document, and then that allows it to flow over to our accounting. So as you're entering a payable record, then you can choose the project and a task. It goes and looks at our pricing and billing rates for this expense type, and it will flow over and update the project once it's posted as well. So there's nice integration points throughout so that you don't have to do double entry of anything, and it allows you to have a better understanding of your projects.
You just hit something on there that somebody asked a question about earlier when you went up to the little light bulb. Explain what that is.
Oh, okay. So most of the menus are available via search, so I can access them either through a menu choice here like selecting, or if I wanted to get to something through a search. So I just did a search on purchase, and what it does is at that point it's giving me everything that has purchase in it, and then that takes me to the menu. So even though I'm logged in as a project manager or project executive, I can still have access to screens such as the chart of accounts or payables documents if I've been given rights to that through this search. So I don't have to, it's very easy to find. So I find clients either a search person or a menu person. Most of the time, if they're a search person, they always go grab the search menu and go looking for their things, or sometimes they're just a menu person where they like to access everything from the role center instead. Are there questions we need to answer, Rich?
Actually, there were a couple. I know we're getting close to the end of our time. So looks like both expenses and invoicing got bunches of questions. So I'll try to boil them down. And this is a three-part question, so I'll ask them all. Does the expense functionality support mobile pictures for receipts, per diems, as well as can you do multiple mileage options or multiple mileage rates?
So yes, we do have the expenses on mobile, and you can put attachments on through the mobile. And then as far as the expenses go, as far as mileage, we can set up. So here is my setup of my expenses here. And so let's say I have more than one mileage rate. It would depend. You could set up more than one mileage rate either through setting up a different expense code here, or if it's project specific, you could set up a mileage rate that way. So when I look at my related information, if I have a unique rate for a specific project, then I could come in here and say this is my project 10 mileage rate and then put in the billable rate there. So you could handle it a couple different ways to get the same thing.
Can you add comments and or documents, and they have in parentheses signed documents, at the invoice level for customer approval?
So you can enter comments on the timesheets that I mentioned. There's also comments on the expenses. Signed documents, what was that about?
Can you attach a document, like say a signed document from a customer to the invoice when the customer gets it back? I'm assuming that's the answer.
I think we can attach the document. Now, if it's at this point, it's not sent with the invoice as an attachment to the invoice. So it would be a separate document you'd have to send.
Tell you what we'll do. We've got just a few minutes left. We got time for one more thing. If you wanted to show one more thing.
You'll notice on many of these screens there's an edit in Excel, and so this allows you to pull data out, make the change, and then bring it back into the screen. So there's easy interface. We also get the question, can we import into screens? And that's true. So yes, there are configuration worksheets where essentially you can create an Excel document that matches what the screen is expecting, and then you can pull it in through that import process. So we can bring data in from other systems, or we can push data out that you can send to another system if you want to. We also have the ability to do what we would call just essentially journal entries, or what we call a project journal. So sometimes we use that as an interface to bring data in from other systems. We do have a variety of ways that we can get data in or out of the system. Also through the Power BI would be another way to do that. We also have just general reports that are available. We find though with project implementations that every company has a unique set of reports that they desire, and so that's why we focus heavily on the Power BI reporting methodology, because that gives you a lot more freedom to get the data that you want in the method that you want it, rather than trying to create all possible custom reports here that every customer we would expect to possibly have. So this gives you the flexibility and the ability to consume the data in the method that you would want.
If there are questions that we can answer that we didn't get to today, if you want to get further into things, whatever we might be able to help with, You all have my email. Kim, I can't thank you enough for being here, and we look forward to working with you all further with Progressus PSA. Thank you.